And his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, "Your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you." And he answered them, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother." Mark chapter 3, verses 31 through 35. Now, to be perfectly honest, doesn't Jesus' reaction sound a bit harsh? In the Jewish culture, like many cultures, family loyalty was huge. This was the Virgin Mary, the same one who spoke to the angel Gabriel, met the wise men, ran away to Egypt to save baby Messiah's life. Jesus could have at least let her into the house. I mean, it was his mom. The fifth commandment clearly states that we honor our father and mother. Didn't Jesus know that? Does he have a different understanding of what honor means? To some of us, the way Jesus responded to his family here may seem downright un-Christ-like. That is, until we know the rest of the story. Taken out of context, Jesus' reaction seems dishonorable. Then again, everything Jesus does is motivated by love. So let's see what is really occurring here. Earlier in the chapter, Mark tells us why Jesus' mom was really in town that day. Then he went home, and the crowd gathered again, so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, "He is out of his mind." Mark chapter 3, verses 20 through 21. Now it's starting to make sense. Mary and the family were coming to town for one reason. Jesus needed to be stopped. They knew he was special, but in all honesty, they thought he was taking this whole mission thing a bit too far. They were certain he had lost his mind, and they were coming to restrain him. Now, imagine what would have happened had Jesus let his mom in the house that day. In front of a crowd of about 50 people, Mary would have publicly told Jesus something like this: "Son, you are out of your mind. Stop all this teaching, healing, and demon rebuking. It's ridiculous. Who do you think you are? Take my hand, son. You need help. Come home this very instant." Or something to that effect. Given this scenario, Christ would have been forced to rebuke his mother in plain daylight in front of everyone. She would have been shocked, embarrassed, and nothing would have been the same ever again. Jesus instead showed his mom untold compassion. He likely saved his explanation for a quieter moment none of the gospel writers ever witnessed. In short, he rescued Mary's reputation by refusing to engage publicly. It was kindness in action. Christ was so focused, so determined on accomplishing his mission that no one, not even his family members, could steer him away from it. When you think about this from the enemy's perspective, it was quite a clever ploy. If anyone could sway Jesus, even for a while, it would have been his mom. But Christ didn't take the bait. He so cleverly turned the attention from family foibles to focus on the Father. The point is obvious. First, when God calls you to accomplish a mission, that is exactly what you do, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Your friends, family, even your spouse may not like it, but then again, you report to your commander and him alone. This is, of course, not precluding the need for wise counsel. Many people have done things in the name of Christ they were never called to do. and they caused unnecessary stress and suffering for themselves and others as a result. But on the flip side, following Jesus on mission sometimes involves doing things that seem a bit extreme and different from the norm. And the enemy's temptation is to back off, slow down, or just abandon the mission altogether. If your mission is truly God-given, it will be opposed. Expect that. The victory on the other side is worth it. And that is enough reason to stay focused, come what may. If we are honest, many of us have held the unstated life mission of simply trying to be happy and comfortable, but it proves shallow and unsatisfying in the end, as many wealthy and famous people could tell you. Now, I have a passion for setting people free from the limitations of inaccurate beliefs about God's heart, God's will, and God's ways. It took a great deal of inner healing and communion with God to discover more and more of what He is really like and to get clear on my mission. But now that I've found it, I am focused like a laser, not out of a religious obligation to try harder to obey God, but out of a divinely contagious desire to see and enjoy God's peace, power, and presence flooding the hearts of people everywhere. Increasing intimacy with God causes us to increasingly desire and enjoy what He desires and enjoys. And holiness is the happy accident of such an intimate relationship. Staying on mission involves saying no a lot, setting healthy boundaries. As you begin to carry out the mission God has called you to, people will take notice. When they do, they may start asking you to participate in their pet missions and programs. It's natural. They want help, and they know you are a person who can get a job done. But if what they are asking you to do is not in line with your calling, and God doesn't have that for you, as evidenced by His peaceful leading within, then it is not your job, even if it is good work. Let it go. So if someone, no matter how influential they are, asks you to take on a mission you are not called to, you have a moral obligation to say no. God is not calling you to do everything, or to join every project, or to say yes to every request for your time and attention. You don't need to apologize, and you don't need a long list of excuses. Just say no. Far too many Christians live their entire lives in a frenetic rush from one distraction to another, and all the while, the world waits desperately for your gifts to heal their land, in sync with the Holy Spirit's leading with His particular missions for you. Another author says, in contemporary society, our adversary, the devil, majors in three things: noise, hurry, and crowds. If he can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, he will be pleased. This, of course, is not an excuse for irresponsibility. Diapers need changing, dishes need washing, floors need cleaning, and the trash needs to be taken out. Mission should never be a veiled excuse for distraction and laziness. Sorry, honey, I can't put the kids to bed because I think God is calling me to watch Monday Night Football. Recently, I was talking with a friend about how valiantly Christ endured the temptations in the wilderness when faced with Satan himself. Jesus was tired, hungry, and thirsty. He was surrounded by wild animals, and yet, even while facing the Prince of Darkness, Christ prevailed. He didn't just scrape by either. He clearly won the battle. As I was remarking about how hard it must have been to resist this kind of temptation from the lead tempter himself, my friend looked at me and said, "Yeah, but that was Christ. He was God after all." She totally dismissed the power of that temptation based on the fact Jesus was God. For Christ to become a perfect sacrifice and to become a faithful high priest, he had to have been tempted as we are in all things. As it says in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin." Now, I know a lot of people may not like the idea that God could have sinned, but it had to be that way, whether we like it or not. In fact, it had to be that way whether we understand it or not. For temptation to be temptation, Jesus had to be able to sin. Of course, he did not sin even once, which makes his victory amazing. And what about Jesus' childhood? What is our concept of that? John Eldridge puts it this way: "For ages upon ages, his generous hand fed every creature on earth. Now it is he that has to be fed. Spoon-fed, drooling most of it down his chin like any other toddler. The Son of God doesn't even know how to tie his shoes. Someone had to teach him how to tie those sandals. John the Baptist said none of us were worthy to untie." Picture 7-year-old Jesus in the shop out back learning from Joseph how to use a hammer and a saw. He who hung the galaxies in such perfect poise, like 100 billion mobiles, has to be shown how to nail two boards together. I take my shoes off. The humility of this is beyond words. Remember, Jesus wasn't faking it when he took on his humanity. End quote. The practical lesson for us still here on earth is that the same secret that empowered Jesus to stay on course amidst a sea of distractions is the same secret available for us now. And that is focus on the Father. A scene a few chapters into the book of Mark gives us a great insight into the heart of Christ for his people. The mission started with a storm. Mark chapter 4 verses 35 through 41 says, "On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, 'Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?' Jesus fell asleep in a storm, and his disciples started to panic. It doesn't seem like they woke Jesus up so he would calm the storm. Just look at how surprised they were once he did calm the storm. How many of us have called out to God with low expectations, often based on our assessment of past situations, others' opinions, our current symptoms, circumstances, situations, while neglecting the promises in God's Word of perfect provision, protection, and healing, wholeness for all who will pay more attention to what He is saying than what anyone else is saying. Psalm 91 describes this state as living in the secret place, close enough to be under the shadow of the wings of the Almighty. It is a mental, emotional, spiritual, relational closeness, not a mere physical proximity for which we may be waiting for heaven. And it is available here and now for all who will turn their eyes, their attention from the storm of symptoms, circumstances, and situations to the Lord Himself walking beside us. That awareness grows and unleashes miracle working power in every situation where it is engaged. God's will is always to heal, to save, to provide. If we're not receiving, we need to get that area of our thinking plugged into the power source, the particular promises of God for that situation found in His Word, and feed on them until what He is saying becomes more real to us than the physical matter, atoms and electrons around us. In Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 13, the story continues. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains. But he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. End quote. Let's start by looking at the demonic host oppressing this man. This was far from a petty little band of impudent imps. A literal army of fallen warriors in the spiritual realm demonized this man. The head demon called his troops a legion. At that time in that culture, a Roman legion had about 2,000 or more troops. That is the rough number of pigs that rushed into the sea when Legion was cast out. It's interesting to note that despite all the demons and all their power living inside the soul of this precious individual, he still had the power of choice to run to Jesus instead of away from him. And Jesus delivered. The Son of God stepped onto the shores at Gerasenes like an invasion force landing at Normandy. This was an all-out war, and Jesus was 1 against 2,000. Unlike the locals, Jesus didn't have physical weapons, clubs and spears or chains. He didn't need them. The demons were scared out of their minds, which may be why they tried opposing Christ the night before with a storm, as some writers suggest. With the same faith force available to us, Jesus swept the power of hell and death out of this man with a word, and immediately commissioned him as an ambassador of heaven to the 10 cities in that area. Contrary to so much common church teaching, Jesus gives us every indication the same power is available to you and me. Right here, right now. We just need to be aware of it more than we are aware of things in the natural. We need to be on the right mission, listening to the right voice, tapping into the right source. Just think about this. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, battled discomfort, weather, 2,000 demons to save one man. The text is very clear. When Jesus finished talking to the formerly demon-possessed man and sending him off as a missionary, he got right back into the boat and headed back across the sea. He spent a whole night and day of his short 3-year ministry to save one man. And he would have come to earth to personally carry all of humanity's sin to hell, even if you were the only one who would ever receive his salvation. Brennan Manning tells a similar story of love and redemption. He says, "Since moving to New Orleans, I've gotten deeply involved in the only leper colony in the United States. It's found in Carville, Louisiana, about 20 miles southwest of Baton Rouge. I've been there many, many times. I go from room to room visiting the lepers, victims of Hansen's disease. On one occasion, as I was coming up from the front steps, a nurse came running toward me and said, 'Brennan, can you come quick and pray with Yolanda? She's dying, Brennan.' I went up to Yolanda's room on the 2nd floor and sat on the edge of the bed. Yolanda is a woman, 37 years old. 5 years ago, before the leprosy began to ravage, she must have been one of the most stunningly beautiful creatures God ever made. I do not mean just cute, pretty or even attractive. I mean the kind of blinding physical beauty that causes men and women on the street to stop and stare. In pictures, Yolanda had the largest, most mesmerizing, most translucent brown eyes I'd ever seen, set an exquisitely chiseled face with high cheekbones and long brown hair down to a slender waist. But that was then. Now her nose is pressed into her face. Her mouth is severely contorted. Both ears are distended. She has no fingers on either hand, just two little stumps. One of the first effects of leprosy is losing all sensitivity in your extremities, toes and fingers. A leper can rest her hand on a burning hot stove and feel absolutely nothing. This often leads to gangrene and eventually demands amputation. Yolanda just had these two little stumps. 2 years earlier, her husband divorced her because of the social stigma attached to leprosy, and he had forbidden their 2 sons, boys 14 and 16, from ever visiting their mother. The father was an alcoholic, complete with frequent violent mood swings. The boys were terrified of him, so they dutifully obeyed. As a result, Yolanda was dying, an abandoned, forsaken woman. I prayed with her. As I turned around, the room was filled with a brilliant light. It had been raining when I came in. I didn't even look up, but said, "Thanks, Abba, for the sunshine. That'll cheer her up." As I turned to look back at Yolanda, and if I live to be 300 years old, I'll never be able to find the words to describe what I saw. Her face was like a sunburst over the mountains, 1,000 sunbeams streaming out of her face. Literally so brilliant I had to shield my eyes. I said, "Yolanda, you appear to be very happy." With her slight Mexican-American accent, she said, "Oh, Father, I am so happy." I then asked her, "Will you tell me why you're so happy?" She said, "Yes, the Abba of Jesus just told me that he would take me home today." I vividly remember the hot tears that began rolling down my cheeks. After a lengthy pause, I asked just what the Abba of Jesus had said to her. Yolanda said that he had said, "Come now, my love, my lovely one, come. For you the winter has passed, the snows are over and gone. The flowers appear in the land. The season of joyful songs has come. The cooing of the turtle dove is heard in our land. Come now, my love, my Yolanda, come. Let me see your face, and let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, and your face is beautiful. Come now, my love, my lovely one, come." Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 10 through 13. "6 hours later, her little leprous body was swept up into the furious love of her Abba. Later that same day, I learned from the staff that Yolanda was illiterate. She had never read the Bible, or any book for that matter, in her entire life. I surely had never repeated those words to her in any of my visits. I was, as they say, a man undone. End quote. Jesus is, in a word, astounding. He'll cross the sea and face the powers of death to save one man. He'll drop into a leper colony to offer healing if you will reach out and take it, and even if you won't, he will still hold you anyway. He is good. He is always good. He is only good. And so when he asks us to stand up and fight, we need to understand he may be calling us to rescue just one person. Perhaps it's a long forgotten family member who you have a feeling may come back to God. Perhaps it's that lady you see on the street every day on your way to work. Perhaps it's the guy who everyone jokes about at the office, the guy who just seems a little strange. Maybe there's a reason he's so strange, and maybe your next mission is to find out why and introduce him to Christ. Perhaps your next mission is to see your husband, your wife, your son, or your daughter, or your parents in a different light and fight for them. We do not self-select our missions. The Holy Spirit within guides us with his contagious desires and rides into combat right next to us.